start with Chapter 7. It's a long chapter, so we'll do part of it today. All right, so this is security operations, they call it. They have these vague titles for the CISSP domains. But anyway, now we're going to talk about administrative controls. So you have personnel controls, which are administrative rules of how you employ your workers and what they can do to limit what harm they can do. So least privilege is a big one. So you don't have everybody running as local administrator over their machines. Only some people need that. Most people don't need it. And it applies to all these other levels. Ah, good. I see who Hakuna is. I'll make a note. Good. Good, thank you. All right, so a need to know is limiting what information people have so they don't know information that they don't need to do their job. And then there's separation of duties, which means one person cannot perform a critical activity alone. At a financial company I worked for, no one person could issue checks. One person could prepare the database and say, here's the checks I plan to issue, and you had to have it reviewed by another person in the accounting department before the checks went out. And that's a very common technique to prevent errors and to prevent one person from committing fraud. You can't commit fraud this way unless two people collude, which is more difficult. Also, you can have rotation of duties where you move people from one job to another. This causes new people to look at your procedures and notice if you've been doing something wrong or if you've been doing something bad and or you've been doing something bad and hiding it. Another one is forced vacations, where you have to take time off so someone else fills in for you, having the same effect. There are non-disclosure agreements required almost everywhere you go, especially anybody in your security team has to sign a non-disclosure agreement. You are going to learn things that are not public knowledge, like about the weaknesses and vulnerabilities of the systems, and of course you're not supposed to expose those. And you should be giving your employees some degree of background checks. At least you might do FBI background checks, which see if they have if they've had criminal history, but you might also be doing things like just checking to make sure that what they said on the resume is true. They really have the right degrees they claim to have and such. So then you have to monitor privilege. If you have high privilege users and everybody has administrators that can do almost anything, then the question is, what if your administrator is doing something bad, like running unauthorized services on the server or stealing the data and selling it? So you have to watch these high privilege activities. There should be an auditing to see what has the administrator been doing with their high privileges, and are they doing anything that looks suspicious, like making an extra administrator account that's not supposed to be there, that sort of thing. Then the forensics is the process of examining computers to find evidence of what has been done on them. And the simplest cases where people are committing a crime with a computer, but this also applies to other things like hackers attacking or malware on a system. You'll collect evidence from it. Teaching the class in it this semester, we always have it here. So some attackers and malware actually perform anti-forensics. They carefully do things to systems to conceal the evidence. You can make malware that lives only in the memory, so there's no record on the disk, so that will fool forensics to just look at disk files. And that's why most modern attacks require you to image the RAM, because the actual crime could very well be happening in RAM and not touching the disk. There's other kinds of anti-forensic too, like files that are difficult or impossible for forensic software to analyze and may crash it. So here's the phases of forensics. You decide that something bad has been happening. You somehow identify the evidence, perhaps by observing strange network connections or behavior or files being created. You decide which systems are involved. Then you gather evidence from them. Then you analyze that evidence, and then you produce a report showing what you have found. So you typically do live capture is the easiest, where you actually run software on the compromised system to gather data from it. This is a possibly risky activity, and that system's compromised. It might not run accurately, but it's the easiest and simplest way to gather data and the most common technique. It usually works, and you don't bother using difficult techniques unless the easy techniques fail. If you want a complete image, then you can complete binary image of the hard disk, the flash drive, and whatever storage devices you have. The binary image gives you all the data on the storage drive, including deleted files that are no longer in use but haven't yet been completely erased from the device. And so that can be helpful. It's just usually far more data than you need for most analyses. So on your disk-based data, you have allocated space, which is files that are in use with a file name and an owner and a creation date and all that stuff. Those are files that are currently in use. Then you have unallocated space, which is parts of the disk that are available for use, and it may contain leftover files or pieces of files, deleted files. And then slack space is little bits of data at the end of clusters, typically 512 bytes or less, that may contain a few fragments of old files, usually not enough to be of any use. And then, of course, there are bad blocks and sectors that are ignored by operating systems, automatically replaced by the firmware with extra blocks for this purpose. And in principle, they might contain some leftover old data, but again, it's not very likely you'll find anything good there. Typically, you find the good stuff in the allocated and unallocated space. These other things, you only find little fragments, typically too small to be much use. All right, so you can do a binary backup of the entire disk with Norton Ghost, with FTK Imager, with Ncase, with the Linux dd command. There are various commands that can access a drive directly and copy every bit off the drive, including the parts that are not currently in use by the operating system. That's called a forensic image. And then there's network forensics, where you analyze the network traffic to detect bad things that are going on. And it is to capture evidence, which may be for a legal case or maybe just to understand a malware infection. It's closely related to network intrusion detection. Intrusion detection looks at the network traffic and tries to match it to a library of known bad traffic, like an antivirus engine matches files to known bad files. So the forensics is the science of analyzing network traffic, which may be and typically is more thorough than just submitting it, comparing it to a list of known bad traffic. And so you look at emails, web surfing, file transfers, conversations, and so on. All these things can be recovered from network captures. And then you got, if you have a binary file to analyze, for example, you find a suspicious file and you suspect it may be malicious, then there are various ways to reverse engineer it. You can use disassemblers to read the assembly code that runs. You can use debuggers to run it in a limited environment and put breakpoints in it. You can just run it in a virtual machine and let it infect the virtual machine and run monitoring tools to see what happens. And that's the malware analysis. We teach a class here in it. I think it's coming around next semester again. It's a very interesting activity. And then, of course, there are many things besides computers these days. There's solid-state devices, drives in most portable things like phones. There's handheld devices. There's GPS units in cars. There's smart light bulbs, smart thermostats, all kinds of devices. All kinds of other devices contain evidence these days, and they require special skills to get the data off of them. One thing I wish we had here was a hardware hacking class. We do have an expert, but we haven't been able to add that class to the program yet. It would be nice to add it. Like hardware hacking and car hacking are very interesting skills, how to get into these other devices. E-discovery is producing evidence for a lawsuit. If you get sued by somebody, like Google built the Android operating system and they used Java, but Java was owned by Sun and Sun was sold to Oracle. So Oracle sued Google saying, you used Java, but you did not pay royalties, but you needed to, and so now you must hand over all the documents showing how you planned Android, how you incorporated Java, exactly how you used Java. That's called e-discovery. You get a court order saying you must give us all the evidence you have about this topic. And so it can be quite difficult to scan all your emails and files and systems and PDFs and everything to gather all that evidence, and that process is called e-discovery. And it's very closely related to forensics and is a big business these days as there are so many lawsuits. Then instant response. Instant response is dealing with violations of a security policy like malware infections and data breaches. And so there are phases of this. You prepare for instant response just by having a team and tools in place, and then you detect something that looks suspicious, then you declare an incident, then you have response. The first thing you do is contain the incident. If you have like a malware infection, then you isolate part of your network. You detect it, you run some kind of scan to find out which machines are compromised, then you isolate them from the network. That's containment, so the problem stops getting worse. That's stopping the fire from spreading. Then you remove the bad stuff, that's eradication, and then you eradicate the attack, and then you have reports going out to show what you did and what you found, and then you have recovery, restoring systems to normal use, and then remediation, pretty much the same thing. And then you'll have lessons learned after you're all over, showing what happened, how good was our detection, how good was our response, how should we change our procedures to make this better next time? And usually you do need to change them. It's a never-ending job of constantly improving your techniques, because the bad guys are, of course, improving their techniques, so you have to be constantly improving your defenses to keep up with them. So preparation is training your staff, writing policies and procedures, getting up people ready with tools and such, like sniffing software and hardware to use. You'll have a checklist of things to do. For example, here you determine whether an incident has recurred. After you report the incident, then you have containment, eradication, and recovery, and so on. You have a sort of list of things you might do to handle your incident that you go through. Then detection is deciding if something bad has happened, often by looking at log files. There are a lot of things that happen that are not security incidents, like you put on an update, now the software doesn't work incorrectly, now some problems happen, some customers complain that the wrong thing is happening on your server, and that may just be a normal malfunction, not a violation of your security policy. Then you have response. Prevent further damage, isolate the traffic, then collect evidence of the systems involved, and of course this is going to impact business. Some servers are going to be unavailable, and your staff is going to be working on this instead of doing normal business, so of course you have to have management approval. You're using up company resources now. Then you have eradication, determine the cause of the incident. You have to figure out exactly what happened, what caused it, and what would block those attackers. Then you have reporting. You have technical and non-technical reports. Technical reports are for your team, so you have a list of exactly what you found, and you can compare it to previous things you found in previous incidents. And then, of course, a non-technical report explaining to non-technical stakeholders who need to know things like your public relations team needs to know, how did this affect our customers? What should we tell our customers? What should we tell our staff? That sort of thing. And then recovery. Get everything back to normal operation and monitor it to see if the infection returns, because your eradication event might not have been strong enough to really remove the attacker. They might still have some control over some of your systems, or they might have a vulnerability that you have failed to block so they can come back in. It very frequently happens. And then remediation. Remove the vulnerability, like I say, change passwords, switch to two-factor authentication, so that hopefully the same people can't come in, but that same technique again. And then you have lessons learned, where you review what you've done and decide how you can improve your processes for future incidents. And root cause analysis is part of this. Like I say, if you didn't ever really figure out exactly how they got in, then it's very unlikely that you've figured out how to block that attack, so it's likely that that attack will happen again. This is often skipped. One thing sort of IT teams will tend to do is when a server is compromised, they'll just re-image the server from a known backup and say, there, now it's working again. And of course, it is working again, but it has whatever the flaw was that let them in, so you haven't actually solved the problem very well. You've just sort of covered it up. So that's why you really have to go to the difficult task of root cause analysis. And often you have to hire outside contractors to do this, because you don't have people on your team that know how to do it. And if you're a big company, you typically hire Mandiant, which is the king of this stuff. They send in experts that analyze your network and really figure out what happened. All right, let's try a Kahoot. Should be here, 7A. I think that says 7A. It does. All right, good. All right. All right, so what process gathers evidence for a lawsuit? That's e-discovery. It's called a discovery order when the judge says you must hand over all the information about this topic from this date to that date and so on. If you don't provide satisfactory discovery, the judge can just rule against you on the spot. It has happened. So it's real important to really make a serious effort to track down all that evidence. All right, which control is also called compartmentalization? That is need to know, not separation of duties. It's called a horizontal control. Vertical control is major privileges like secret, top secret, classified, and a horizontal control is your area of specialization. So if you work in Russia, you're allowed to know information about Russia, but you don't need to know information about China, so that's compartmentalization. Even though you might have top secret clearance, you don't have access to all the top secret information in the world, but only the top secret in your area. That's a need to know. All right. All right, which control requires personnel to keep secrets? That's a non-disclosure agreement all over the place. A real important part of doctors, lawyers, and security professionals. All right, which process includes writing instant response policies? That's preparing. All right, that's good. The preparation for instant response. You have a policy. All right. And which process must include a non-technical explanation? All right, that's reporting. All right. And which process includes submitting a final report to management? That's part of the postmortem. All right. Good. All right. All right, good. Stop this recording.